Francesca Delaney slammed her car door shut and looked up at the old log cabin nestled between thick pines and a sky smeared with orange from the setting sun. "Still standing," she muttered, brushing a curl of hair from her face as she adjusted the heavy duffel bag on her shoulder. Barely. It had been 9 years since she last stepped foot on her grandpa's land. He'd passed 5 months ago, and she hadn't had the courage or the time to come up until now. Her job as a junior interior designer in Chicago had been suffocating her, and when her boss stole her pitch and slapped his name on it, she quit on the spot. So she packed a bag, threw it in her beat-up car, and drove 6 hours north to the only place that had ever felt like home. The cabin creaked as she stepped inside, dust particles dancing in the fading light. It smelled like old wood and a hint of cigar smoke, exactly how she remembered. She spent the next hour unpacking and opening windows, letting the chill mountain air sweep through. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since breakfast. There was nothing but canned soup in the pantry. She grabbed her keys, but just as she stepped out onto the porch, a black Range Rover rolled past on the narrow gravel road. It slowed when it reached the cabin next door, once a rundown hunting shack, now completely rebuilt and gleaming with floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek cedar paneling. A man stepped out, tall, dark hair, broad shoulders. He wore a fitted gray sweater and jeans that probably cost more than her rent back in Chicago. He turned, locking eyes with her. Francesca froze. He gave a polite nod. "Evening." "Hi," she said, hugging her coat tighter. "Didn't realize anyone lived next door anymore." "I just moved in last week," he replied, walking toward the property line. "Nathaniel Vance," she blinked. "Francesca, my grandfather used to own this place." "I know, Frank Delaney," he said, surprising her. "He used to wave at me every time I drove past, even if it was just to drop off supplies during the renovation. He once gave me a loaf of banana bread. Best thing I ever tasted," she grinned. "That sounds like him. What brings you up here?" She hesitated. "Needed a break from the city." "Burned out. Thought I'd clean up the place, see if I can make something of it." He tilted his head. "You're in design, aren't you?" "How'd you know?" He pointed to the interior of her cabin. "You've only been here an hour and already rearranged the furniture." She laughed, caught off guard. "Guess I can't help it." Nathaniel's smile was warm. "If you ever need dinner, my kitchen's stocked. We've got salmon marinating and I made too much." Her stomach growled again. Loudly, he chuckled. "That's a yes." She hesitated just a beat. "Yeah, sure." "Thanks." The inside of his cabin was stunning. Open concept, clean lines, soft lighting. The scent of lemon, garlic, and rosemary wafted from the kitchen. "You live here full-time?" she asked, watching him move around the chef's kitchen with surprising ease. "Sometimes," he said. "I split time between here and New York." She raised a brow. "Big job," he shrugged. "I run a few companies." She didn't push. She figured rich men usually like to keep things vague. Still, something about him didn't scream show off. He had that quiet confidence, like he didn't need to prove anything. "Wine?" he asked, holding up a bottle of something French with a name she couldn't pronounce. "Sure," she said, accepting the glass. "This place is incredible, by the way." "Thanks." "I wanted something peaceful." "I can see why," she said, sipping. "So, you really cooked all this yourself?" He smirked no, smiled, and set a plate in front of her. Perfectly cooked salmon with roasted vegetables. "I like cooking. It keeps my head clear." They talked through dinner. About their lives, the city, her job, her quitting. He listened without interruption, his eyes focused on her like she was the only person in the world. It was unnerving, and kind of nice. After dessert, yes, he'd made chocolate soufflé. He walked her back to her cabin with a flashlight. "You really don't have to," she started. "It's dark out," he said simply. "And there are bears," she laughed. "You're just trying to make sure I come back for dinner tomorrow," he grinned. "You found me out." When they reached her porch, she turned to him, suddenly aware of the silence between them. The woods were quiet, stars blinking overhead. "Thanks again," she said, her voice softer now. "Anytime." She was about to go inside when he added, "You've got something on your cheek." Before she could react, his fingers gently brushed her skin, his touch light but electric, her breath caught, their eyes met. But then she stepped back. "Good night, Nathaniel," he nodded, his eyes lingering on her a second longer. "Good night, Francesca." She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, heart racing. What just happened? The next morning, she found a box on her porch. Inside, fresh croissants, a jar of homemade strawberry jam, and a note written in clean, bold handwriting. "In case you skip breakfast like last time." And she stared at the box for a moment, then laughed. Okay, so the millionaire neighbor was charming, but that didn't mean anything, right? She didn't come here to get swept up in some mountain romance. She came to reset her life, fix the cabin, fix herself. Still, she couldn't stop herself from glancing toward his place every time she stepped outside. And she definitely couldn't stop herself from smiling at the thought of dinner tonight. The hammer slipped from Francesca's hand and clattered against the hardwood floor, narrowly missing her foot. "You have got to be kidding me," she muttered, glaring up at the crooked shelf she'd spent the last 20 minutes trying to hang. It leaned like it had given up on life entirely, mocking the spirit level lying uselessly nearby. Outside, the late morning sun filtered through the trees, casting gold onto the porch. She wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped out, stretching her arms and squinting into the light. Across the narrow dirt road, movement caught her eye. Nathaniel, tossing a duffel bag into the back of a sleek, silver SUV she hadn't seen before. She hesitated, then called out. "Running off already," he turned, sliding on a pair of sunglasses. "Just into town. Supplies." "You need anything?" "Only a miracle involving drywall anchors and a working power drill." He considered her for a moment. "Got time?" Francesca blinked. "For what?" "Helping you prevent a future head injury." She looked down at her shirt, already streaked with dust and a smear of paint she didn't remember applying. "Are you sure? You look like you've got somewhere important to be." "I don't." He crossed the road without waiting for an answer. "Besides, I suspect you'll end up impaled by a nail gun at this rate." She opened the door for him, stepping aside. "Welcome to the disaster zone." He surveyed the inside with a slow glance, taking in the scattered tools, the half-unwrapped rolls of wallpaper leaning against the wall, and the open laptop on the counter displaying blueprints. "You're redesigning the whole place," she crossed her arms, suddenly self-conscious. "Eventually, I've got a plan, sort of." He crouched to retrieve the hammer, rolling it between his fingers. "Mind if I take a look at that shelf?" She gestured toward the leaning monstrosity. "Be my guest." "It's been mocking me all morning." Nathaniel removed his sunglasses and tucked them into his front pocket, then stepped up to the wall. Francesca watched him work, noticing how his movements were precise, purposeful, not rushed, not hesitant, just confident. "I thought you were more of a boardroom type," she said, leaning against the counter. "I am," he replied, not looking up, "but I grew up around construction crews. My father ran a contracting business before he sold it." She blinked. "So you're a secret handy billionaire," he glanced at her, amused. "You assume too much. You drive an imported SUV, wear shoes that probably have their own security detail, and you serve soufflé on a Tuesday night." He stood upright, brushing off his hands. "So, maybe I just like soufflé," she laughed despite herself. "Touché," he stepped back, gesturing to the newly leveled shelf. "Try not to hang from it." She reached out and pressed gently on the edge, solid. "Okay, I'm impressed. You should be," he said, walking toward the door. "I accept payment in the form of coffee." She raised an eyebrow. "Bribery? Self-preservation. If I'm going to be summoned for every lopsided shelf, I'll need caffeine." She poured 2 mugs and handed him one, careful not to let their fingers brush. It was starting to become a problem how aware she was of him in small, unnecessary ways. "So," she said, sipping, "what actually brought you here? This isn't exactly the usual retreat for someone like you." He leaned against the doorframe, watching the trees sway in the breeze. "Let's just say I needed to disappear for a while." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. "You hiding from someone, from everyone?" She tilted her head. "That sounds dramatic." He looked at her then, and something passed across his face, something shadowed. I walked into a board meeting last month and realized I didn't recognize a single person in the room, not even the ones I'd hired. Francesca blinked. That's bleak. I built something I don't understand anymore. And I'm not sure I like the man running it. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That wasn't the answer she expected. He set the empty mug on the counter. Thanks for the coffee. I'll bring your drill back later. As he turned to leave, she called out, Hey, if you ever want help forgetting who you are, I've got a 100-year-old plumbing system that could use a distraction. He looked over his shoulder, and for the first time, his expression softened into something vulnerable. I'll keep that in mind. Later that afternoon, Francesca stood on the back porch, peeling paint chips off the railing when the sound of tires crunching gravel drew her attention. A delivery truck pulled up in front of her cabin. A man in uniform stepped out and retrieved a long, narrow box. Delivery for Francesca Delaney, she signed, puzzled. I didn't order anything. The man smiled. Comes with a note. He handed her a small envelope, then drove off. Inside the box, a brand new power drill, sleek, professional grade, probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. She opened the card. In case the shelf gets lonely. She stared at the drill, then at the note, unsure whether to laugh or throw it across the room. Instead, she did neither. She set the drill on the table, walked outside, and started sanding the railing. She didn't need his help to fix her life. But she wasn't going to lie, it was getting increasingly hard to remember why she'd always sworn off men like him in the first place. Francesca stood in the middle of the old living room, arms crossed, staring at the exposed brick wall she'd uncovered behind a layer of ancient plaster. It was uneven, weather-worn, and absolutely perfect. Her fingers brushed over the rough surface. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was building something that mattered. The knock at the door was soft but deliberate. She wiped her hands on her jeans and pulled it open. Nathaniel wasn't in his usual relaxed sweater and jeans. He wore a navy button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and dark slacks. His hair was still damp, like he'd just stepped out of a shower. I need a favor, he said, eyes scanning her face. She raised an eyebrow. You, asking for help, I know. It's new for me. She leaned against the doorframe. What kind of favor? There's a charity event tonight. Black tie. I'm a last-minute addition to the donor list, and my business partner bailed. I'd rather not go alone. Francesca blinked. You want me to be your date? Not a date, he clarified. Just a buffer. You'll get dinner, champagne, and the satisfaction of watching a room full of people pretend they like each other. She hesitated. I don't have anything even remotely close to black tie. I took the liberty of having something brought in, he said, stepping aside. A sleek black car waited by the road. A woman emerged from the back seat holding a garment bag and a small case. Francesca stared at him. Are you serious? I called in a stylist. She owes me a favor. You're unbelievable, she said, trying to suppress the surprise in her voice. You can say no, he said, but I think you'll like it. It's not your usual scene, but it might be fun. She glanced at the bag, then at him. Fine. But if I fall on my face in borrowed heels, I'm blaming you. Fair enough. An hour later, she stood in front of the antique mirror in the back bedroom, staring at her reflection. The gown was a deep sapphire, the kind of blue that made her skin glow. Her hair had been swept into a low twist, and subtle makeup highlighted her cheekbones. She barely recognized herself. Nathaniel was waiting outside when she stepped onto the porch, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored charcoal suit. When he looked up, something in his expression shifted. You clean up well, she said, breaking the silence. He offered his arm. You look stunning. The car ride into town was quiet at first. The driver took the winding road slowly, the mountains fading into the distance. Francesca watched the trees blur past, trying to ignore how aware she was of Nathaniel sitting beside her. You do this kind of thing often? She asked. Too often, he said. Most of it's performative. Handshakes, checks, a few fake smiles, and people pretending to care about causes they barely remember by morning. So why go? Some of the money ends up where it should. That's enough for now. They pulled up to a converted historic estate that had been transformed into an event space. Golden lights twinkled through the windows, and a valet opened her door before she could even reach for the handle. Inside, the space buzzed with polished conversation and the clink of glassware. A string quartet played near the grand staircase, and servers floated through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Nathaniel's hand hovered near the small of her back as they moved through the crowd, guiding her gently but never touching. He introduced her to a few people corporate names she recognized from headlines and magazine covers. Francesca Delaney, he'd say, a designer working on a personal restoration project. She noticed the way people looked at him. Not just with respect, but with a kind of caution, as if power clung to him like an aura. And yet, he always turned back to her between conversations, asked for her thoughts, kept her close in a way that felt almost protective. They were seated for dinner under a canopy of glass chandeliers. The table was set with silver-rimmed china and crystal glasses. Nathaniel leaned in slightly as the first course was served. "Still think I'm unbelievable? I'm reserving judgment," she said, sipping her wine. "You're handling this better than most," he said, watching her. "I used to wait tables at places like this," she said. "You learn how to blend in." He studied her for a moment. "You don't blend in. That's what makes you impossible to ignore." The words slipped out so casually, but they hit her with the force of a confession. She looked away, suddenly flustered. After dinner, they stepped out onto a balcony that overlooked the gardens. The air was crisp, and the sky was clean and sharp with stars. Francesca leaned on the railing. "You know, back in Chicago, I used to imagine nights like this. Just not with someone like you." "Why not?" "Because men like you don't usually see women like me. We don't exist in the same world." He stepped closer, his voice quieter now. "That's where you're wrong." She turned to face him, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. His eyes searched hers like he was trying to find something buried just beneath the surface. Then, without warning, a voice called out from behind them, sharp and far too familiar. "There you are, Vance. I was wondering when you'd show up." A man in his early 40s strode onto the balcony, tall and lean, with slicked-back hair and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Francesca stiffened. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Derek, I thought you told me you'd be flying solo tonight," the man said, glancing at Francesca. "Guess you found a last-minute replacement." Nathaniel didn't respond immediately. His shoulders squared. "This is Francesca Delaney." Derek's gaze lingered on her a beat too long. "Interesting taste, not your usual type." Francesca's stomach turned, but she kept her expression neutral. Nathaniel's voice dropped. "Watch your tone." Derek laughed, raising his hands. "Always so serious, I'll leave you two alone. Just wanted to say hello." As he disappeared back inside, Francesca turned to Nathaniel. "Friend of yours, business partner, for now." She watched him carefully. "He doesn't like me. He doesn't like anyone he can't control. And you let him stay in your life, for the moment," Nathaniel said, "but not for much longer." They didn't return to the ballroom. Instead, they walked slowly through the garden paths lit by string lights and low lanterns. Francesca paused near a stone fountain. "Why did you really ask me to come tonight?" Nathaniel stopped beside her. "Because I wanted to see what it would be like to have someone I didn't have to pretend with." She looked up. "And it's better than I imagined." The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full. Charged. Then, gently, Nathaniel reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch lingered for just a second longer than necessary. She didn't pull away. But she didn't move forward either, not yet. Because if this was real, it had to mean something, and if it meant something, it could break her. The morning after the gala, Francesca stood barefoot in the kitchen, pouring water into the kettle as her phone buzzed against the counter. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She let it ring out. She hadn't slept much. Not after the way Nathaniel had looked at her in the garden, not after the way her chest tightened when he brushed that strand of hair away from her face. There had been something in his eyes, something unguarded, as though he'd let her see behind the curtain he so carefully held in place. The kettle whistled. She poured the water and settled by the window, watching a squirrel dart across the fence. The cabin was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt suspended, like something was waiting to shift. A knock sounded against the front door. She opened it to find Nathaniel, hair tousled, shirt untucked, something unreadable in his expression. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside, and he walked in without speaking, stopping in the middle of the room like he wasn't sure what to do with himself. "What happened?" she asked. "I need to tell you something. And I need you to hear all of it before you say anything." She nodded, her pulse quickening. "I haven't been honest with you, not entirely," he began. "My name is Nathaniel Vance, but not just the way you've heard it. I'm the CEO of Vance Capital. My company bought out Delker Energy last spring." Francesca blinked. "Delker?" "My firm acquired them through a private equity deal. Your grandfather's land was part of a disputed lease Delker never resolved. I didn't know it at the time, not until after he passed." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean disputed?" "Delker claimed they had rights to drill on his property, but your grandfather had filed a legal challenge before he passed. It was buried in paperwork. When I found out, I froze the lease and shut down the deal." She stepped back. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't want you to think I came here with an agenda. I didn't even know who you were until the day we met on the porch." "But you stayed," she said, her voice tight, "even after you found out." "I stayed because I couldn't leave." "Not after meeting you." She folded her arms. "So what now? You own the land." "No," he said firmly. "I gave it back, quietly, legally. It's yours, all of it. I had the paperwork notarized yesterday." Her breath caught. "You what?" "It was never supposed to be mine." "Your grandfather wanted it to stay in the family. I made sure it will." She stared at him, the weight of his words curling around her ribs. "Why would you do that?" "Because I care about you," he said, stepping closer. "Because somewhere between fixing shelves and walking through wild gardens with you, I stopped seeing this as just a place. It became the only place that felt like I could breathe." Francesca's throat tightened. "You should have told me." "I know," he said quietly. "I was afraid if I did, I'd lose whatever this is before I even had a chance to hold on to it." She turned away, trying to gather her thoughts. The cabin felt too small, the air too close. "I don't need dinners or dresses or charity events," she said. "I don't care about the suits or the money or what boardroom you walked out of. But I do care about honesty, and I don't know how to trust someone who hides parts of themselves." "I'm not hiding anymore," he said. "I'm standing here telling you everything. Because I want you to see all of me, even the part that messed this up." She looked at him then, really looked. And underneath the polished confidence, she saw the man who helped her fix walls, who made her laugh in the middle of chaos, who showed up with breakfast without asking. "You gave the land back?" she asked again, softer now. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded sheet of paper. The deed, signed and witnessed. She traced the edge of it with her thumb. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't do it to earn anything," he said. "I did it because it was right, and because he meant something to you." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "I miss him every day," she whispered. Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice low. "He would have been proud of you. You're building something here with your own hands. You didn't run. You stayed, you made it yours." She looked up at him. "Why are you really here, Nathaniel?" He reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath hitched. "I'm not proposing," he said quickly. "Not yet, but I want to show you something." He opened the box. Inside was a pendant rose gold, shaped like the cabin's silhouette, tiny, delicate, unmistakably her grandfather's roofline. "I had it made," he said. "I thought maybe you'd wear it close, for the days that feel too heavy." Francesca's fingers trembled as she lifted it. "It's beautiful." He stepped back, giving her space. "You don't owe me anything, but I needed you to know the truth, all of it." She looked down at the pendant, heart racing, then back at him. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, "but I know you didn't have to do any of it." "And you did." Nathaniel nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll go give you space." "No," she said quickly. "Don't." He stopped. She took a breath. Stay, just stay, he exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing. They walked out onto the porch together. The wind rustled the trees, and overhead, clouds shifted to let sunlight spill through. Francesca looked at him. If you're really serious about not hiding anymore, I need one thing, anything, no more secrets, no more half-truths. If we do this, we do it with everything on the table. He held her gaze. You have my word. And then, slowly, she reached for his hand. For the first time, he laced his fingers through hers. They stood there, side by side, the cabin behind them, the road ahead uncertain, but for the first time it didn't feel scary. It felt like possibility, like a new beginning. And as the wind carried the scent of pine and earth through the air, Francesca knew one thing for certain. She had come here to find herself, but she'd found something else too, something real, something hers. Francesca stood at the edge of the lake behind the cabin, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in layers of burnt copper and rose. The surface of the water mirrored the sky so precisely it looked like she was standing between two sunsets. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the strange ache of knowing everything had changed and somehow nothing had broken. Nathaniel came up behind her, his footsteps muffled by moss and pine needles. She didn't turn, she didn't need to. She could feel him there like the pull of gravity had shifted to him alone. I talked to Derek, he said. Formally severed ties. She turned then, surprised. You did? He threatened to go to the board if I backed out of the offshore deal. I told him I'd already handed in my resignation. Francesca stared at him. You left your company. I left the version of the company that no longer aligned with who I am. I'm keeping the parts that matter. The foundation, the art grants, the education initiatives, everything else I'm letting go, her brows lifted. That's not a small choice. It wasn't, but I couldn't keep building something that made me feel like a stranger in my own skin. And I couldn't keep hiding behind it, hoping people would only see what I let them. She stepped closer, her voice soft. What do you see now? He looked at her with a steadiness that made her breath catch. I see someone I want to build with. Not just a life, but a place where I can actually live. She felt the tears threaten again, but this time she didn't fight them. I was so afraid this would end in some quiet goodbye, like all the good things in my life eventually do. It's not ending, he said, reaching for her hand. It's beginning. She let him lace his fingers through hers, her other hand resting lightly on his chest. What does that beginning look like? Nathaniel leaned down, pressing his forehead gently to hers. It looks like mornings here with you, sawdust in your hair and coffee on the porch. It looks like turning this cabin into something permanent. It looks like staying, not just until I'm ready to face the world again, but because this is the only place I've ever wanted to be. She blinked up at him, her voice breaking. I think I love you. His thumb brushed her cheek and his voice came low and certain. I've been in love with you since the night you made fun of how I plated salmon. She laughed, and he kissed her slow, unrushed, like he had nowhere else to be for the rest of his life. The world faded around them, the lake, the sky, the trees. There was only this, the brush of his lips on hers, the solid warmth of his arms, the impossible rightness of it all. Later, they sat on the porch, blankets wrapped around their legs, her head resting on his shoulder as the stars blinked into view. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't come back here, she said. You would have been fine, he said, kissing her temple. You always find your way. I think I was meant to find you, she whispered. You did, he said, and I'm not going anywhere. 2 weeks later, the cabin was buzzing with voices, the scent of cedar sap mixing with fresh paint. Francesca stood barefoot in the living room, directing a small team of workers as they installed the final section of custom shelving in what was now a fully renovated design studio. Her design studio. Nathaniel leaned against the doorway, holding a mug of tea and watching her with quiet amusement. You're not going to supervise the tile installation too? He asked. I already did, she said, grinning. Twice, he walked in, handed her the tea and kissed her cheek. You're unstoppable. You're biased. Yes. And still right. They walked out to the front porch, where a sleek matte black SUV was parked beside her old car, which now boasted new tires and a fresh coat of paint courtesy of Nathaniel's mysterious mechanic friend. In place of the hand-painted wooden sign that once read Delaney Cabin, a new one had been carved, Delaney and Vance Designs. "I figured partnership made sense," she said, slipping her hand into his. "I like the sound of that," he murmured. "Though I still think we should have called it Sawdust and Secrets." She nudged him with her shoulder. "You're never living down that banana bread story?" "I regret nothing." He pulled her down the steps toward the gravel driveway where a picnic blanket had been laid out under the trees. They sat, the late afternoon sun casting dappled light over the grass. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her pocket. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Is it another shelf?" She handed him a key. "It's for the back studio. I set up a drafting table there for you, in case you want to keep building anything, including a new company." He stared at the key, then at her. "You really think I can start over?" "You already did," she said. "You just needed the right space to remember who you were before the suits and the silence." He cupped her face in his hands, his voice rough. "You gave me that," she smiled. "You earned it." They kissed again, beneath the whispering trees and golden light, no pasts left to haunt them, no secrets left to unravel, only the quiet, solid promise of right now and every day after. Months passed. Spring melted into summer and the cabin became more than a home. It became a haven. Francesca's design business thrived, drawing in clients who traveled hours for her work. Nathaniel taught local workshops on sustainable building, his hands finally doing what they were meant to. On a warm September evening, friends from town gathered beneath strings of soft lights in the backyard. Mason jars filled with wildflowers lined the tables, and the air smelled of fresh bread and pine. Francesca wore a simple ivory dress, her curls swept back, her feet bare in the grass. Nathaniel waited for her under the arch he'd built himself, wearing suspenders and a crooked tie she'd teased him for all week. They said their vows beneath the trees where they'd first stood side by side, a quiet promise written in every look, every laugh, every choice they'd made to stay when they could have run. Later, as the crowd danced and music carried through the woods, Francesca pulled Nathaniel away from the lights and into the quiet of the porch. She leaned into him. "Still think this place was just a retreat?" "No," he said, wrapping his arms around her. "It was the moment everything finally began." And beneath the stars, with her head against his chest and the sound of laughter echoing from the trees, Francesca knew she hadn't just rebuilt a house. She'd found the only place she ever truly belonged with him.